Welcome to our talk on the high and why of seeds and seed saving with expert seed keepers Lisa Bloodnick and Owen Taylor. Our program today is co-sponsored by the library and the Hartford Area Bionutrient Food Association. And as you can see, they've brought many wonderful things for us to look at today. Lisa and Owen are both avid seed collectors, working with seed catalogs like Baker Creek, Rare Seeds, and seed conservatories to protect and expand the diversity and quality of available farm and garden seed stock. Lisa's beet collection alone is upwards of over 700 varieties. And after the program, I encourage you to look at everything that they brought. And we also have a seed library upstairs across from the reference area, and I encourage you to take out seeds from there. So please join me in welcoming Lisa and Owen.
Thank you, Sue, for the nice introduction. Welcome, everybody, to the Simsbury Public Library, and I love the fact that they have a seed library upstairs. Definitely encourage you guys to all check it out. I'm going to try and get a chance to before I leave as well. We welcome you to our talk today on seed keepers and seed saving, and we have we want it to be as interactive as possible. Feel free to raise your hands, ask us any questions as we go, and try, you won't bother us of anything. I also brought a lot of seeds that I can share with you all. So if you all are avid gardeners and are interested, I have a quantity of a unique sunflower that I'm raising. That's kind of my own strain now, and a lot of beans that I can share. There's some tomatoes, peppers, things like that as well. So, after the talk, if you want to give yourself, a few extra minutes and scope it out, see if anything really strikes your fancy. Some of them are in low supply that I can't share, but other ones I have plenty of. So, and that's the best way is, keeping it alive and moving it forward. So, Owen has some questions for you guys.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you so much for hosting us, the library, to the Bionutrient Association. We are going to spend our time here with you, first telling you a little bit about ourselves and our work with seeds, and then we will go into the why and how of seed keeping and seed saving. And then we're hoping to have enough time at the end that we can spend some time with this plant material for those of you that are interested, to demonstrate how we extract the seeds from these mysterious plants up here that you may or may not recognize in their mature states. We have some very simple methods with using your hands and your breath to thresh and winnow, as well as a machine here powered by a shop vac if you want to see how that works. We might even cut up a big squash, divvy it out, and show you how you take the seeds out of it. To start, we wanted to get a sense of who you were. So I'll just have you raise your hands if ... So raise your hands if you are an avid gardener. Okay, that's most of you. Awesome. Raise your hands if you're a market farmer. Okay, great. A few of you. Yeah. Raise your hands if you're an aspirational gardener. Like maybe someday you will start. Okay. Great. Raise your hands if you came just because you thought seeds sounded like a cool topic.
Hopefully that's all of you.
Okay, raise your hands if you've ever saved seeds from anything and planted it.
Nice.
Great. Did any hands lower when I said and planted it? There was one. Okay. Raise your hands if you saved tomato seeds. Okay, wow, awesome. Raise your hands if you saved lettuce seeds. Okay, not many of you. How about
garlic?
Garlic seeds. Not bulbs. Seeds. Okay, one. Biggest plant nerd in the corner.
She's a plant nerd.
Yeah, my friend Beth. Happy birthday, Beth, also. Okay, so I think that's good enough for now. So those are the questions. We want to play you a quick video. It's a trailer to Seed the Untold Story, just to get us in the mood. It's a beautiful video.
It looks like it's starting in 21 seconds.
Oh, really? Here, I can.
saving is all about sex. And human...
Sounded good so far.
Yeah, it's a great.
Hang on.
Okay, how to get this to show.
Do we need technical assistance from upstairs?
We may not be able to show it.
Who made the original movie?
So the original Siege Untold story is director Taggart Siegel, and
Came out, I don't know, what, 5 years ago or so?
yeah, we might have some technical difficulties on that, which
We'll just move on.
Yeah, okay.
and it features Vandana Shiva, Will Bonsall, a few other
Was it an educational film or a
Yes,
commercial?
it was kind of an inspirational documentary style, interviewing seed savers around really the world, Vandana's out of India. But so anyway, we will move on though and see if it's like a 2-minute clip that inspiration, and passion behind seed saving, why it's important. But anyway.
Yeah.
We have the whole screen.
Go with that.
Yeah, just keep going. We'll go to our part. So, I think we're opening, hopefully in a minute, about we are all interconnected, and I'm trying to, this is checking. Basically, be humble and respectful. Be open to learning from each other and the land. Honor the past, present, and future. Respect those from whom the seed has come, those who hold the seed, and those who will hold it in the future. As I've embarked upon my seed journey, it's evolved from, at first it was just a basic, somebody gave me some, a tomato that I really liked. I got a garlic. Garlic was one of my first things I started saving. And it was done more as a market gardener approach, which I'll introduce my garden in a minute. And not so much a realization of the long history, and basically the way I see viewing, holding a handful of seeds in my hand is a connection to history of people, history of humans, and the cultural stories. There we go. Oh no. And the stories behind it, and it became more of a project and a passion once I got more into it, beyond the botanical purposes to seed saving. It became a connection to my community, and as I've been developing my collections, I've made friends around the world, literally, through seeds. And to me, it's very important to keep those stories with it. We'll talk about the importance of storytelling as we go.
And we'll just
It's fine. We'll move on.
We didn't minimize that and open it in the separate window on the browser.
We're moving on.
Thank you.
We're very flexible up here. We'll just move right on.
Okay.
So I want to introduce myself, my farm. We are primarily market gardeners. That is what we do for a living. We just concluded our 25th year market gardening in upstate New York. I'm from about halfway between Binghamton and Ithaca. We farm about 4 acres, and we are a horse-powered farm. This is my husband and son. And it's nice because the horse is very photogenic. It's good marketing as well. But, my husband and the horse. Her name is Annie. She's a Belgian. We've been farming with her for about 10 years. And here's a little overview of the garden from a distance. Early morning mist rising. We are very diverse. I sell primarily farmers market, CSA. I have, let's see, I think this is our this coming up will be our 24th year doing a CSA, Community Supported Agriculture. If you're familiar with that, like a farm share program. And so that 24 years makes us one of the oldest in the country. I think when we started there was about 500 in the nation, and now there's thousands. So we're old timers now. But we're pretty diverse. We grow a little bit of everything, except the space grabbers. I grow only a small amount, like for market, I only grow a small amount of corn and pumpkin kind of thing. I don't do a lot of that. My primary thing is, especially the greens, the salad greens, and carrots, garlic, small, the small intensive stuff more. We sell also a small amount to restaurants, mostly overflow stuff. But the farmers market in Vestal, New York is like our, where we've been selling for going on 26 years now. We started the farm right out of college with no experience, and a little plug for your local public library. We taught ourselves how to farm from, taking out books from our library. Mostly Elliott Coleman books, things like that, all the organic gardening books at the public library. We checked them out and read them several times over back.
I missed the name of your farm.
Bloodnick, I don't say it. So there you go. Bloodnick Family Farm. Or Bloodnick Farm. We actually just mostly make it shorter. Bloodnick Farm. And we have a very popular following at a farmer's market. And grow a lot of beans. A lot of people associate me with dry beans now, but I actually grow a lot of green and yellow beans to market. My entry to saving our own seed, or as Owen pointed out to me yesterday, technically not seed, but is garlic. We love garlic, first of all. We only grow one strain. We plant about 6,000 every year. And this variety is called Carpathian. It's a Polish heirloom from the Carpathian Mountains. And we just randomly happened upon it. A man local to us had been growing it for 40 years, and he has since passed away. And the neat thing about this is we've been selecting our own and saving our own strain the entire time, and for certain characteristics. And a couple of, the guy Mike passed away maybe 10, 15 years ago, I'm guessing. And I never go on the street that he used to live on. And 2 years ago, I happened to take one of my kids over on that road to hang out at a friend's house. And I noticed the same name was still on the house. I knew he was dead. And I realized his son must have taken over the house. So Christmas Eve, I wrapped up like half a dozen of my best garlic bulbs, and I dropped them off Christmas Eve as a little Christmas present with a thank you card. And the guy had no idea who I was. And I said, I want to thank you. I said, your father's garlic helped make our farm possible. It's a substantial portion of our income. And he actually cried. He actually cried. He doesn't grow garlic himself, and for him to have that connection of his dad's strain of garlic, he didn't even know what to say to me. He barely said a word to me. He didn't even say thank you. He just got all teary on me and everything. So I just quietly left. And about 3 or 4 days later in the mail, I got the most amazing thank you card. He didn't even know what to say, how much it meant to him to have that little part of his dad back. And then some pictures from Owen.
Thank you. Okay, so my journey with seeds, I'm going to tell you starting way back to give you context for what I do now. I grew up in Windham County here in Connecticut. I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania now. But I had a garden encouraged by both of my parents who are here with their partners now. And I really only saved seeds, I think, from the marigolds because they just jump out at you. Right? I don't think I saved any seeds from anything else. But that's how I got started with growing things. Worked on many rural farms in Virginia and New York and Connecticut. But I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area with my first community garden because it was my first time living in a big city, and it was such a healing thing for me. And I heard a talk in one of my college classes from a woman who was working in a prison, and she had a program called the Garden Project, and she was talking about how impactful and powerful the garden program was for people who are incarcerated, and how healing that is to be able to touch the soil and to care for a plant and to be able to eat the food that you grew. And I realized that something I knew my whole life, that growing things is healing and grounding, that of course that's true for everybody, and particularly for people who need it the most. And so I started focusing on food justice work within the context of environmental justice. And that the kind of philosophy behind that is people who are most impacted by environmental problems are usually poor people and people of color. And so my work for the last 15 years has been in working in nonprofits that work with people who don't have access to very healthy food, and helping to lead training programs and farming programs that works to change that. And usually, the work is led by people most impacted, and I'm there to support. And so that's the context for my work with seeds. I spent 7 years at an organization in New York City called Just Food, running training and livestock programs. So I built probably 20 chicken coops around the 5 boroughs, trained a lot of elders and youth who grew food in their communities to then train other people. And I found myself, after I got married to somebody who hates New York City, living in Philadelphia. When I got there, I was community organizing, helping people hold on to their land. Now that so many people are moving back to cities, the prices are going up, gentrification is happening. So a lot of the community gardens that happened after white flight in the 70s and 80s are now getting turned into condos. And so I worked to organize to keep that land in gardens and farms, to respect the work that's been happening for the last few decades. Meanwhile, that was a part-time job, and I got another part-time job with my mentor, William Moyes Weaver. And this is him here. I needed some more hours, some more money, so I started working with him. And who's heard of Dr. Weaver before? Okay, just people who I know. Okay. Actually, I met him through my friend Joe Rosen in the very back. So shout out to Joe Rosen. And I'm going to tell you more of his story in a moment, because I'm going to tell a couple seed stories that one of them relates to him. But he's been doing this for 40 years. He learned from his grandfather, who started in the 30s. And so I just found myself in this magical world of seeds, and totally fell in love and decided to switch gears and learn from my mentor, and then be able to take that back to the communities I've been working with in Philly and New York and beyond. So now for 4 years I worked with Dr. Weaver with his seed collection that has 4,000 heirlooms in it. And he's just west of Philadelphia. And this is one of our plots of land up in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania German Cultural Heritage Center. And after 4 years working with him, I decided to start a seed company. So that's where I am now. This is me on a hot day, just fresh from the swimming hole, back in the field. And I have a farm west of Philly, in Newtown Square, where I grow primarily seed crops. And I welcome visitors from all around to come and learn and volunteer and learn how to save their seeds. And so I produce a lot of seeds for my company, which is called True Love Seeds. True Love is a family name. I thought it was also just a beautiful name for a seed company. But like Lisa was saying, it's so important to honor our ancestry in this work. The seeds that we grow now have been developed over 10,000 years of human agriculture. And so a lot of the work that we do is honoring that. We'll get into that a little more later. But part of that came into honoring my family by naming the company True Love Seeds. And to tie this back into the food justice work, I grow a lot of the seeds, but I also work with, I don't know how to stop that. Is it okay? Does it sound okay? I also work with farmers from all around, including many urban farmers. I prioritize working with people that are doing community food justice and food sovereignty work. And so in Philadelphia, that looks like, this is my partner Chris, and he runs a farm that focuses on crops of the African diaspora. They work primarily with African American and African immigrant youth. UA is our Urban Tree Connection, and he works also with African American youth. Same with Al-Kibalon, who took Joe Rosen's place at Mill Creek Farm in West Philly. Adam Forbes works with refugees from Myanmar, who were farmers in the mountains in Myanmar. And Anna works with UA, and Lan works with Vietnamese boat people, the refugees from the American War in Vietnam. And so my work now is to mentor a lot of the urban and rural farms who I'm connected to in seed production, and try to help them deepen their seed sovereignty work through producing seeds for this catalog. So that, and the first question I ask is, what tells your story? What seed talks about your ancestors, about the place that you live in, about the community work that you do? So, sorry, that was a little long-winded, but gives you a little background in my work. These are just some of the growers. Here's the Vietnamese refugee garden, Resilient Roots Farm. This is Sankofa Community Farm in southwest Philly. This is the Novik Family Urban Farm in South Philly. That's mostly refugees from Myanmar. This is East New York, Brooklyn, East New York Farms. They produce a couple Caribbean varieties. They have a big population of folks from the Caribbean. This is Tobacco Road Farm up here in Lebanon, Connecticut. I worked there a couple summers, really lucky to land there through connections that my mom and her partner Mike introduced me to in 2005 and 2012. My friend Kristen Leach grows Korean crops in Oakland, California, outside of Oakland, California. Friends of mine in Virginia, mule-powered farms. They grow a lot of Syrian crops because my friend Mason's grandfather came over from Syria and brought a lot of his seeds with him. So those are just glimpses of some of the 17 farms that I work with on seed production. And some quick little stories. This is, yeah.
I think one of the points Owen is, exemplifying is, the strength of food to culture. And, every single one of us, food brings out such dominant, strong memories, like even the smell of a certain food cooking triggers like childhood memories of, family members or events or something. It's a very powerful, primal kind of, deep-seated connection that every single one of us has. Some special dish that's associated with a holiday, some sentimental thing that my grandmother always made. Food and culture and our own, memories are all deeply connected.
Yeah, thank you. A good example is the Syrian, I always say it wrong, but molochia, or jute, or Egyptian spinach. Who's heard of that plant before? Also called okra leaf. A few of you. I grew it this year from their seed, and through social media met all these Egyptians and various Middle Easterners who were like, I've never seen that fresh in this continent. And we're like, can you bring it to me in Maryland? Or, okay, I'm coming there next month. And I did, and it just is so powerful to taste that flavor again once you've been, for whatever reason, separated from your homeland. And for me, growing up in Connecticut, several generations removed from my immigrant ancestors, that means rediscovering or relearning what those foods were. We didn't care, my parents, their parents didn't carry on those foods necessarily. And so, for example, I'm mostly Irish and Italian, and a little Jewish. I'm still trying to figure out the Jewish crops. But the lumper potato is the famous potato from the Great Famine in Ireland. Okay, I'm not going to tell that story too deep, but usually I talk about colonialism versus late blight and the ways that they interacted to cause the famine. This is an interesting one because it ties me both to Connecticut and to my Italian heritage. The Borlato bean. Originally this bean is from South America. But it was brought to Italy centuries ago. It was domesticated further, and this is an Italian type. I recently been in contact with my friend Rachel Sayet from Mohegan, and her mother, Melissa Tantaquidgeon, who's the Mohegan medicine woman. And they sent me, I gave them a calendar. I make a calendar every year, and I had a lima bean picture from the Potawatomi people, and talked about how the various native tribes make, succotash. And she said, hey, our family makes that too. Mohegans make succotash too, and here's a recipe from my great-uncle, Harold Tantaquidgeon. And his recipe had this bean in it, this Italian bean. And, what's that?
South American Italian.
South American Italian bean that's then a Mohegan bean, also later. Because we kind of make these varieties our own as we adopt them into our garden and into our kitchen. And so then I started growing it to connect both to the Mohegan story and the Italian story, and also the South American story. And Melissa commented on my Facebook, said, oh yeah, we used to buy that from the Italian farmer down the road. So it ties back in. So I guess my point is that, yes, like those foods can bring up these deep memories, and they're so powerful of our homelands. and we create the story as we go too. So a lot of people are like, I don't have a culture, I've been here so long, I'm not connected to my food culture or my culture, and I'm like, well, start remaking it. It's so important for our food to have a story, and that's kind of the essential piece of what we do. Melissa, yes.
I don't know if people do take comments from the peanut gallery, but it's funny when you say, to adopt your own culture, whatever. I'm German and Polish, and, cabbage, is not a favorite of my kids. But my sister happens to be adopted Korean. She married a naturalized Japanese American, and they're now living in Tokyo. So the kids are growing up in Tokyo. We started eating a lot of Japanese food. My kids love sushi. I started growing edamame. We don't just eat edamame like in Asian foods. We eat edamame just like you would eat lima beans. It's just seaweed and wasabi and edamame are like staples in our house, as well as sushi rice.
Interesting. Yeah, that's just what happens with food. If you look at your dinner plate, it's very unlikely that it consists of the foods your ancestors ate or the foods that are Native American. It's like we're in a globalized food world, and we make the food our own. This is a Sisopsin corn that actually was given to my mentor by my friend Rachel from Mohegan's great aunt Gladys Tantaquidgeon. And so it's a Lenape variety from the Delaware people, which are people whose land I live and farm on now. This is a fish pepper. Who's heard of the fish pepper? Okay, a few more of you. And that might be because of the work of my mentor. Dr. Weaver found this in his deep freezer, his grandmother's deep freezer, in the 60s. His grandfather had died 10 or 15 years earlier, and he discovered his whole seed collection in little baby jars with labels. And that's how he revived the Roughwood seed collection, which is where I was working the last few years. And this was one of those seeds. It's a pepper that is hot and was used in the catering communities of Baltimore, black catering communities of Baltimore, in the oyster dishes and seafood dishes. And that's why it's called the fish pepper. And they would use these white fruits. It's a variegated plant with variegated leaves and fruits that ripen red. But they would use the white peppers in the fish dishes so you wouldn't see the flakes. And the seed was given to my mentor's grandfather, H. Ralph Weaver, by Horace Pippin, the famous folk artist, African-American folk artist, in exchange for bee stings for his war injuries from World War I. And so that's the really powerful story that kind of ties up a lot of the things we just talked about with my mentor. I'm going to stop there. There's really powerful stories here. A couple Gullah Geechee crops from the Sea Islands of Carolinas and Georgia. Here's my big Italian squash, Lunga di Napoli. I brought one here that we can cut open after. Another way that I'm trying to reclaim my Italian heritage through growing Italian vegetables. But I'm going to stop there and move on to the kind of content around, why keep seeds and how to do it.
Okay, so to you, what is a seed? Anybody? A blueprint? A DNA capsule coding for future replications of itself? It's a baby. It's
a possibility.
a promise of possibility. Exactly. I mean, the more I've evolved, I've gotten more past the strict botanical definition of what is a seed to it's a promise, it's a commitment, it's a promise to the future generations that, these seeds are, here now and we will take care of them to ensure them for the future. And, I wanted you to think about what does it actually mean to plant a seed? And, to me, it's a continuation, it's our responsibility. Seeds can be viewed as our relatives and, we're tied together. And especially in times of today, we're going to just lightly brush the politics of it because it is very intense. But in today's global
globalization of the seed world and as well as everything else, there's been such an erosion of genetic diversity, and it's under, food crops in particular are under extreme pressure and threat. Things are being evolved or being selected for shipping, things like that. Not so much the flavor, the regionality of the item. So what does it mean to plant the seed is to protect it, to preserve it, to continue it forward so we can maintain that resource, that reservoir, because especially with, and we'll talk a bit about some of the groups I work for, like Experimental Farm Network, which is a mutual friend of ours, Nate Kleinman and Dusty Hines. I grow for them, and one of their main missions is to plant things that are under threat from human actions, whether it be climate change or civil war. One of the things that I plant for them is a sorghum, and this is called coral sorghum, and it's available at several seed companies now, but I've been growing it for, I think this is my 3rd year growing it for them, and it's from a village in South Sudan called Malakal. It's indigenous. Sorghum isn't such a big crop in this country except for animal feed, but in other countries around the world it's a staple crop. And this is an interesting sorghum. It's a triple use sorghum, so you can use it green for sweetener. They shred the stalks and extract the sap and then boil it down to make sorghum syrup like a molasses. And so it's for a sweetener, or the green immature heads, they strip off, like we would cut corn off the cob and they steam it or boil it in like butter and salt, kind of like a vegetable dish. Or they let the grain mature and dry on the head like I have it here. And it can be toasted and popped like we would eat popcorn. This is a popping sorghum. So you can eat it like a nutritious snack, or they can grind it to a flour at that point as well. So it's a very important crop. Now, this village in Malakal was destroyed by civil war. Their seed stocks were lost. I work with several groups that utilize the resources USDA maintains several seed banks around the country, the Grin Repository, and so we get seed stocks from them, and they happen to have a sample of the sorghum. And one of our goals is to eventually, as the village is resettled in the future, is to be able to have enough of us farmers growing it that we're able to send seed stock back to them and rematriate the seed to the people. So to me, to plant this seed is an honor and a way of giving back as well. And this was just kind of to keep me on track so I didn't get yapping off on. But anyway, so seed saving, as both of us I think have been emphasizing, is a way to protect and preserve cultural and biological diversity. And I love the seed in my hand there. It's one of my favorite seeds. That's the fingerprint fava from Peru. And it's really beautiful. And I actually chose this because this seed has a memory of home. It's grown, whoa, jumped up there on the volume, but it's grown mostly equatorial regions. This particular strain is from Peru. And when you grow it up here this far north, it loses its fingerprints. But if you take that seed, is what I've been told, obviously I haven't gone back, but if you took the seed that I grew, and they still have like faint swirls, but not that clear fingerprint effect, which is so cool. I have some samples here you can look at. But if you take them and grow them back by the equator, they still genetically remember that fingerprint, and the fingerprints return as they go home again. Wow. So I thought that was cool. So this is, I think both Owen and I are definitely in agreement on the seed repatriation and reconciliation. I've been spending the last year studying with a Mohawk woman, Rowan White, and highly recommend her. She does an online course. It's a Seed Siva seasonal mentorship program. If any of you are really, really interested in saving seeds, I highly recommend her course. It's about a 10-month program online. You can study at your own pace, which I love because in growing season I'm like, homework, not happening. But now in the winter I'm having time to catch up.
My name is Michelle Bicking. I'm from Hidden Acres Farms in Holland, Connecticut. Hi, Ellen. Rowan Webb will be in Connecticut in June if you'd like to meet her in person. I'm hosting a 3-day conference called Where Women Gather. So I'm just putting my plug out there if anybody wants to
Awesome.
meet a good lady in person.
Go see Rowan. She's an amazing speaker. Yeah, so I've been, I've had the, follow her on Instagram. She's a powerful writer. Yeah, she's the best. She's definitely got the best thing going out there. But anyway, her program, her online course is amazing. Highly recommend it. And this is one of the main themes throughout is, the seed rematriation and reconciliation. And I'm not going to bother reading. Like, I hate it when somebody talks and read from their slides. But you can scope it out. Actually, go forward. Yeah, hang on one second. But the work cross-culturally to care for these seeds and restore trust and develop collaborative relationships. One of the opportunities that I've had is through one of Rowan's mentors was a Mohawk man, Stephen McCumber, and the really, just speaking of rematriation, it was kind of a chance thing. I told Nathan Kleiman that I needed some sort of focus because I get stuff from all over the world, but I also at some point can be overwhelmed, and it's nice to have a focus and a theme if you become a serious seed collector. So I said, look for things upstate New York, heritage. And one of the things he sent me was a corn called Katie Wheeler, and it's a Calico Flint corn. He just randomly assigned it to me to grow out to replenish some stocks that the USDA had. So I did and sent it back, but I put it on my Facebook page. And I kind of use that as, mostly networking, farm, networking, gardening info and stuff. And Stephen McCumber, who, the Mohawk man, contacted me. And he said, I'm the man who originally collected that strain from Katie Wheeler, who is still alive in her 90s in Cattaraugus, a nursing home on the Cattaraugus Reservation. And he had lost his seed stock years ago, and although he'd shared it out, it had fallen out of favor, nobody was growing it that he knew of. And he figured it was lost. And here I am, not native, just randomly happened to have a sample of that I grew out successfully. So he tagged which ears of corn, and he asked, could I please have it back? And I was able to return it to, the person who collected it. And I just was so honored that I could do that. And it formed a relationship with Stephen, caring for and collaborating on more seed grow-outs and stuff. So,
Similar Stephen McCumber story. I met him through Rowan as well when I grew out a variety he named called Seneca Blue Bear Dance. And I wanted to mention it to add to the story that, similar to the importance of having many people growing out the varieties, part of that importance is the genetic diversity. In this case, you were able just to have it still alive. And he hadn't lost the Seneca Blue Bear Dance. I just happened to be growing it also. And we were able to do a 3-way trade with Rowan and Stephen and my grow out, because when you're growing in small plots for seed saving, the genetics start to, inbreed a little bit. And so to be able to then reconnect with people who are growing similar rare varieties that are important and swap, each sent each other 100, 200 seeds to combine and then grow out, that means you have a much wider gene pool. And there's a big benefit to that as well. And if you're the one person growing this nearly extinct thing, it'd be great to find friends, regardless of whether you're Mohawk or not, to help you maintain the genetic diversity and vigor and strength of that population size.
and as another side note on collaborative relationships, people like Rowan and Stephen, et cetera, Mary Arquette, they've formed the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network. I just wanted to give a shout out to them, and they're working with the Hudson Valley Farm Hub, and Ken Green from Hudson Valley Seed Library, who is the founder of the Seed Libraries, as you guys have one. It's, you know, a direct result of Ken's work. And so they have formed the, what's the name of their farm? Blanking. But, and basically it's a project to remake, it's Seed Shed, has a longer name, but online Seed Shed will get you there. if you search it. But anyway, Ken is now specializing in working with the Aquasasani specifically to rematriate some of the seeds. Ken and his crew and associated people of Hudson Valley are growing them out, and the Mohawk people are coming down and helping with the harvest. They help with the planting periodically. Because up at the Aquasasani Reservation, it's not the greatest land that they have to grow, so this is some better ground. And so they're restoring. So it's a good example of collaborative relationships that can develop through seed keeping. And rematriation, reconciliation, because basically Ken's growing on land that was taken from the natives. And so it's a way of healing those cycles and helping restore relationships and working as allies.
Another similar point is just how thinking, okay, how can you take this concept and use it? And one great thing for me has been able to reconnect with friends, a couple of whom are in the room, to be able to send seeds that are in my collection that are about to expire, because seeds have a shelf life. And so Beth and Joe, and even my mom has helped as well, in their gardens, be able to send them, oh, my Mary Reynolds tomato is 10 years old, I need to grow it ASAP. Or, oh, the blue Shakamaxim bean is about to expire, maybe it's already dead, can you try to revive it? And that's been helpful. I mean, we're going to get more into the technical part, but I wouldn't let this stop you. I think it's important to just save seeds no matter what. But for me, because I'm stewarding really rare, important varieties, I like to make sure they don't cross-pollinate with other varieties. And so that's why I'm always looking for trusted friends and family to grow out, like the blue Shakamaxin, 30 feet, 40, 50 feet from any other bean of the same species. And so that's something that could be done in a community, stewarding important varieties to your community. We don't all have to be seed savers if we're gardeners, but it helps to take on some of those important varieties for the community. I think we'll get into it more, but part of what would be really cool about a specific community doing it versus me sending it all over the country is that you're keeping those genetics adapted to your place. And so that way, if people network in here and say, I'm in charge of the Connecticut field pumpkin, then your genetics for that seed are adapted to your climate here and your soils, and then also to your taste. A lot of communities like a pumpkin a specific way, and so you select over time for certain qualities. But that's jumping a little bit ahead.
We kind of wanted to just briefly address the fact on the erosion of genetic diversity, and I don't know, are you all kind of fluent in the causes? I didn't know how much time you wanted to spend on this, but the consolidation and buyouts of seed companies, the globalization of the food industry, and it was not that long ago, this is a graphic, 1903 to 1983, so 80 years. And you can look at it, 288 beets varieties down to 17, and now it's probably a few of those have disappeared since as well. And you can go through, and see that loss of diversity, and the reasons for this. Most of it, due to the changes in systems of distribution, moving, people moving off the farms, a loss of regionality, standardization, but also the politics of buyouts, and I think that Seed movie had this facts, and I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but, even Monsanto was just bought out by Bayer, it gets, I had a graphic that I actually had cut out, with, all the little Venn diagrams and little offshoots of how things just consolidate down. And now it's just a couple, global multinational companies. And for example, tomatoes, something like 90-something% of tomato seed production are controlled by 2 or 3 companies. They and I don't really want to get bogged down with the patenting of life issues and stuff, but it's a real thing, and it's not okay. So, does anybody want to, should we just move on? Did you want to say anything about you know,
You should say more, if you can. Yeah.
Say it again?
I said you should say more, to dwell on that topic a little bit.
Dwell on this, you said?
Yeah, a lot
he
of
said
people
say
don't.
more,
I
expound.
think, and maybe everybody in this room.
Yeah, well, maybe let's hear from folks. Why, how, I mean, we heard some examples, but why were there 544 varieties of cabbages a century ago and now 28? Like, what are the reasons for this?
Industrial, agriculture, stuff that's able to travel well, not bruise, look pretty, but not necessarily be like nutritional.
Can you hear in the back?
Sure.
Okay, great.
There's so many reasons. Laws changing that farmers can't save their own seeds.
And changing even in diets, you know, cabbage, you know, like cabbage is not a cool vegetable overall, you know.
I think it's really cool.
I think see how it facts. I was like one of the things I should love cabbage.
Right, well, just one point, laws about saving seeds. I mean, we, in Pennsylvania, one of 3 states in recent years that interpreted the Federal Seed Act of 2004 to mean you can't have seed libraries, you can't have seed swaps. And it was just an interpretation that no law changed. And so in Philadelphia, we had a seed exchange that just shut down. They gave away all their seeds and they stopped. And they didn't realize that they could have actually continued on. They didn't understand the nuances of that law, but that happened for a lot of people. They just said, okay, I can't do this anymore, it's illegal. And so that has a big impact. What varieties were in that exchange that maybe weren't being circulated elsewhere. But I think all the points you make are really huge around, okay, does the cabbage ship 3,000 miles? If not, you're out of here. And originally we were selecting not for that. We were selecting within our communities what tasted really great. And a lot of times taste is connected to nutrition. What is the most nutritious? What grows really well in my backyard or on my farm versus what seed does this big company think will ship across the world? So yeah, there's another question or comment back in the back.
Somebody else besides me?
No.
Yes, right in front of you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was a lack of communication. That's probably the reason why we had more seeds, 100 years ago. So with communication, all these things are happening as well. It's true. Both ways.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, a couple more right in the back and then I'll come. Now it's you.
That's me now.
Yep.
What's the possibility that some of these varieties still exist in the wild? Has anybody explored that?
I heard, or in someone's freezer up here.
Well, not so much that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
as the top left says, that these are what commercial seed houses offered. That isn't to say that there are only 28 varieties of cabbage seed
Right. there's certainly-
available.
Right, but
Certainly.
what
You know-
you can buy from the standard catalogs.
Right, if you're a member of Seed Savers Exchange, I don't know, is anyone here a member of Seed Savers Exchange? A couple of you. There's probably, I haven't counted cabbages, but there's probably a lot more than 28 that show up in their catalog. And so this is more what's available in the seed houses or seed companies, which is a huge deal.
Because the fact is, that's what most people are going to use.
Right. Most people order from the catalogs. Seed saving is kind of a dying art in this country. Certainly not in agricultural.
Yeah. It seems like it's ever growing.
Yeah, I mean, look at the room. You all are here and interested, excited. Certainly the network of us seed keepers is really alive and well.
And I think actually a lot of it actually is due to the internet, too. I know my collection, which I'll talk about in a bit, is mostly because I'm online, and trading all over the world, literally making friends around the world, which is, you're talking about the lack of communication, but we're also now at a point in history where communication also is it's instantaneous and simultaneously very easy. As much as there can be drawbacks, there's also pluses.
Oh, one more comment, yes.
A lot of the change too is people doing backyard gardening. They don't have the patience to do heirlooms, so they have a lot of new varieties now that are hardier and genetically modified, that, they're holding off all the pests so they don't have to deal with that. And then for the marketing, like with the tomatoes now are bred so that if you drop them, they won't crack. That's what they want in the stores. They don't want the brandy wines and all the heirlooms and the little cherries and grapes that are cracking. People don't want to buy cracked fruit, in the store. So this has been driving a lot of the changes in what seeds are available. I know a lot of people who pick up plants at Home Depot, tomatoes and stuff, and God, if you eat one of them, there's no flavor. There's nothing to them. They're not the heirlooms. But it's driving what's being sold today.
But that's changing, because if you go to the grocery store, you'll see that you can buy heirloom tomatoes now.
There is a market.
multicolors.
It's changing for everything. It's
Right,
not
but the
just-
seed that's available.
It's not just gardens, it's changing for medicines, it's changing for things like handcrafted items like knitting and sewing. There's a certain segment of our population that's become dissatisfied with video games and things like that, and they're reaching out for what we used to know and used to do.
Right.
The real things.
Yes.
And that's the hope. That's like the hope that we have to hold here, is that we keep moving in that direction. I think the kind of comment you made about people, convenience really, and better living through chemistry, I kind of got that from your comment. Like the big shift in our culture in the 50s, 60s, 70s away from the farm, towards chemical agriculture, excitement around hybrids. I mean, hybrids really are very exciting. It's true. I mean,
I grow a lot of hybrids, actually.
yeah.
I'm a market gardener.
But
Yeah,
it
I
also
grow
means that we
tomatoes.
lose our culturally important heirlooms as we switch towards hybrids. There's a lot of benefits. I actually don't think hybrids are a horrible thing, but we have to make sure we maintain those that have fed us for generations. I think we do. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe we should talk now about what is a hybrid, what is open pollinated, just to kind of move from that point. Me too. Very unpredictable volume. Okay, well, I personally only grow open pollinated. I think hybrids are exciting, but I only grow open pollinated seeds for sale through my catalog. And a lot of small seed companies will only focus on open pollinated. So open pollinated, who knows what that means? Yeah.
Yeah, open pollinated just means that it's going to grow true from the seed.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's going to grow true from seed, and that's the big reason why I focus on open pollinated.
I know some people use open pollinated as meaning not isolated when they're growing it.
Mm.
So they'll differentiate between isolated and open pollinated, even if they're talking about seeds that are heirloom seeds, but not hybrid seeds.
Okay. I do isolate all of mine because I want people who I give or sell seeds to know what to expect. And that's what you get from an open pollinated plant. You're not in there with a Q-tip, pollinating by hand. You're letting the bees, the wind, the natural forces get in there and move around the genetics. And you're using a crop that is fairly stable, right? Hybrids, you can treat the same way. You can save seeds from hybrids. Hybrids are where there's some control over the two parent lines, right? And you've intentionally crossed, or unintentionally, but usually intentionally crossed two different parent lines to create a very vigorous or specific crop. And so that's why a lot of people use hybrids, because of often the vigor or the predictability. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Or even, I have certain hybrids, like say for tomatoes. We actually grow 3 main tomatoes, and then, I have all my heirlooms that are at the ends of the rows and stuff, but the reason we grow hybrids, disease resistance or sometimes pest resistance, but tomatoes it's mostly disease resistance. I'm looking for, especially like Mountain Magic and stuff have a bit of blight resistance. There's a line of them. But hybrid vigor, uniformity. I am a market gardener. I need to pay my bills. It's not fun to really garden for a living sometimes, and it's difficult enough. It's nice to have a reasonable expectation of yields, and I need say 500 pounds of tomatoes a week at least. So I am pleased with our hybrid selections, and the flavor's great, and grown organically with our practices. But super high producing, and I don't care. I don't know about your farmers markets here, and I don't care what you tell me. Like, oh, I only eat heirloom, whatever. When I have trays of round red slicers that are perfect 8 to 10 ounces, and then next to them is my trays of heirlooms that are beautiful, stripy, all different colors, sizes, shades, whatever. 9 out of 10 people buy a round red slicer. And no matter what they tell me, they want to have a BLT when they go home, or tomato sandwich, whatever, if you're a vegetarian, they're going to buy a round red slicer. I got my heirloom people, they'll buy the heirlooms, but almost all the heirloom people will also buy the round red slicers, and very few of the round red slicer only people will buy an heirloom. It's just the way it is, and so
Yeah, my mom calls those regular tomatoes.
Yeah, and that's what I call too.
But she's also the one who stores the tomatoes in the refrigerator. My dad's got a little bit more appreciation, and I got him away from the hybrids.
Yeah,
and got him hooked on brandy wines. But he always used to grow super sweet 100 cherry tomatoes. I got him the Sun Gold. Still hybrid, but
I was just going to say, Sun Golds, I will never give up Sun Golds as long as I can get them, and they're a hybrid. And the fact is, do any of you grow Sun Gold cherry tomatoes? Yeah. It's so good. I mean, I'm not giving it up. And they're just wonderful. So there are reasons to grow hybrids, and like I said, I like to pay my bills on time.
And you can save seeds from hybrids, and it's actually really fun if you just want a fun experiment.
If
You
have-
probably
if you
would
have
never
time
do
and
it as a
space, I would
market
never
farmer.
do it. I don't have time and space.
But if it's been a long time since I took science with genetics and stuff. But basically, if you plant out a whole lot of seeds from hybrids, you'll get so many different phenotypes. They'll look all different ways and grow all different ways. And you can start to select out of the hybrid second generation, for qualities that you like. So it could be a fun science experiment. Yeah.
I went to an interesting talk, and it was called The Heirlooms of Our Future, and the role that a hybrid can play. Like you said, there's reliability in those hybrids. So if you start to save the ones that did well in your area, in your particular garden, you never know what will happen down the road if you keep selecting those ones that you like, and you could end up with.
Just look at Brad Gates' stuff. Wild Boar Farms, he's amazing. And they call them the modern heirlooms as well. They're all open pollinated and everything, but they're not the heirlooms yet. That's typically designated 50, 60 years depending who you talk to and everything. But yeah, it's kind of cool. Just select. And if you're starting off with a hybrid, it takes 8 years before it's considered a stable line. That's not unreasonable for most of us.
Yeah, and I think probably most of our heirlooms now started as a hybrid, as a mutation, as a mistake, right? That was cool or delicious or grew really well somewhere.
Wasn't Green Zebra an example of that?
Yeah, that's one of Tom Wagner's. I don't know the history of how.
I feel like there was a big argument on whether it was considered an heirloom because of his lineage, but now people are like,
Yeah, it's not an heirloom because that's only been around, not that long.
I feel like if I remember correctly, it was one of those situations where you just kind of kept selecting.
Well, that gets, I don't know if we want to jump to selection because we're talking about it, but it's an
Heirloom
interesting.
Heirlooms are open pollinated, though there's some
Right.
really old hybrids that some people might consider heirlooms just because of their age. It's generally not used in that sense. But there are also open pollinated that aren't heirlooms, like you said, because they're newer.
Yeah.
But another thing about trying to develop an open pollinated version of a hybrid tomato or just breeding new varieties of open pollinated tomatoes is the tomatoes, what's the word I'm looking for, culture, has worked on this most recently with the hybrid, or with the dwarf tomato project, in that they're actually swapping seeds across the world so they get 2 growing seasons a year instead of just one. So it's stabilizing in half the time.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah,
I
that's
see.
right.
Right, so it's still 7 or 8 generations.
Yeah, so
stabilizing,
growing,
but you have 2
here in the
generations
U.S.
in
and
a year.
also in Australia.
Mhm.
And then sending seeds after each season so the next person can grow them because they're starting their seeds, to plant that summer.
Well, even like Blaine
when
Horton's
the first
involved
one's
with that
wet.
project and stuff, and he's down in Louisiana, think, somewhere down south. So,
Craig?
no, not Craig. Blaine Horton is also part of the
okay.
project. Yeah, he's a tomato breeder, and so he's part of that. And he can do two seasons a year. But,
It was a good point about like a Venn diagram between heirloom and open pollinated and when they cross and when they don't. And an example is a Tobacco Road Farm in Lebanon, Connecticut grows salad mixes, different greens, and they really like the hybrid vigor in anything. Even the Polish watermelon that they sell through my catalog has got some hybrid vigor, has a pretty diverse gene pool, and they're all open pollinated. So they started with ice-bred arugula that was bred in Maryland, and then for a decade or a decade and a half, they've been growing it through the winter in Connecticut, and selecting for the ones that survive the winter and thrive and have vigor. And so now they've bred it even more winter hardy. They have a Mizuna landrace that they bred with Maruba and Tatsoi, which are all Brassica grappa. And so the same species, and they only selected seeds from the Mizuna mother plants, but it's got this amazing vigor because of that genetic diversity. But they've stabilized it over many, many, many years, and so now it's an open pollinated landrace. So it's suited to their
a land race that's suited for Connecticut.
For Lebanon, Connecticut, for their fields. Yep. And so that's an open pollinated variety that's not anywhere near an heirloom because it's so recent.
And Frank Morton, Wild Garden Seed is also, that's what he's famous for, is his basically wild gardens, and he just lets nature do the work for him and then select what looks cool and interesting. And there's always a lot of diversity. I buy a lot from them, and especially in greens mixes. There's always some like cool diversity population. It's almost more like a landrace. Just wanted to flip through so we can start doing some hands-on stuff in a minute. Inbreeding and depression, particularly important in crops like brassicas. Some crops it's not as big a deal. Population size, we have a handout that you can start passing around that addresses some basic facts and statistics. And then also roguing and selection. It's really important if you're going to be seed keeping. You look at your population and roguing. Say I have, for me, I do a lot of beans, so say I have black turtle beans, and I see they're supposed to be a bush bean, but there's quite a bit of vininess on occasion in them. So I want to go through, before I'm saving seed, I want to go through and basically rip up. Or don't save seed. For me, it's easier to rip up because I have a lot. Any seeds that's not exhibiting the characteristics that I'm desiring. Corn, it could be excessive tillering. I did want to say something about hand pollination. We were going to gloss over it because it's a little bit more advanced, but the hand pollination is how I do some of my rare corns. If I'm doing, because corn's so easily cross-pollinated and it's wind-pollinated, so it's very hard to control. And it's big, so it's not like you can cover it with a row cover like you could with like a cucurbit or something. So corn, I actually have a picture. I do hand pollinate some corn. Actually, I guess it's pretty far down. I put bags over. I have tassel bags and shoot bags. And here it is. And I actually found you can actually. I ran out of the official type bags. You can use brown paper lunch bags. So I want to cover the tassels, cover the shoots. And as it gets to the silk point, I trim back the silk. Just take a little pair of sharp scissors. I trim back the silk, and and I keep it covered until this point. And as the pollen, you can see when the spikes start, the pollen starts forming. You gather that, and then I mix all the pollen. And corn pollen degrades in heat, so you want to do it in the morning, preferably before noon. Like I try and shoot for hours like 8 to noon, kind of where the best corn hours for the maximum viability of the pollen. I mix it all together in a bag and I shake it, and then I go down the row, and each shoot bag I take off and I'll trim back any of the silk showing, expose the tips. And now each of those silks, I don't know if you're familiar with corn biology, but and I didn't know this until I started getting more and more into it, each silk
piece of silk is a pollen tube, and each corn kernel is responsible for the development of one kernel on an ear of corn. So, and all it needs, so you want to shake and make sure you get good, each piece of silk potential there gets a little pollen shake on it. And when you get your corn ears not well filled out, you want to remember the pollination, how important it is. Each piece of silk needs some pollen. And then I cover it back up, and I just wait, and then, it's actually not as difficult as it looks. It's a little time consuming. I don't do, I do corn for the CSA and stuff. So I want to isolate. I do small plots of the other corns. You wouldn't want to do a lot like this because it is so time consuming. But squashes are also, I've hand pollinated squashes, and I've done some rare watermelons that I've hand pollinated and stuff. And there you have your male and your female flowers. You just need to know, and you can go back to the basic botany one. Identify the male and female flower parts there. And so with squashes, you have your male flowers, your female, you all know how to differentiate. And so for the male flower, it just has, the male flower is just stalked, and then the female flower has a little baby zucchini, we'll use zucchini as the example, has a little baby fruit, in this case we'll use zucchini, at the base of it. And that's the ovary that turns into the fruit. And you can easily, once you start looking at it, tell the difference. And all I do is I peel the petals back and use the male flower like a little paintbrush. I pick the flower, and then I use it like a little paintbrush, peel off the petals and dab, 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 and then cover my plant back up. It's, if you have something particularly rare that you want to keep going, it's the way to do it. And then you can also, one of the things I learned, you don't have to do it for the whole season. You can just identify, and do a couple blossoms and then mark them, whether it be like a piece of colorful yarn around the base of that particular fruit, and then you know that one was hand done. You can take the covers off and let the rest of them go and eat those. So, yeah. Keep going. Just some pretty garden. So we'll start talking about harvesting and cleaning seeds. I'm going to give it over to Owen for a bit.
Okay. I wonder, I kind of want to just use props. So, I'm sure some of you immediately know what this is. But most people don't know what this plant is when it's at this stage. Sorry? Lettuce, yes. So this is lettuce. Maybe you don't know it when it's fully mature. Maybe you do. So what do these look like? You can kind of see it in the light. These little tiny puffs. Huh? Dandelions, yeah. So they're asters, just lettuce is an aster like a dandelion. And they do kind of the same thing when they're going to maturity. And so, basically, I'm starting with this, but the first thing to know is, when is the plant mature? Some people will say, oh, this is a delicious cucumber, I'll save the seeds. But what are the seeds like in a cucumber that we eat?
They're soft.
They're tiny, they're soft, they're translucent, maybe. So knowing when the seeds are mature in the plant is one of the first steps. I will say, stepping back a second, we didn't really talk about isolation distance, because that's another important thing. And it's on your handout. So the chart on your handout has a whole column on how far, if you're trying to maintain the purity of that variety, how far you should keep them from each other. I often spend a lot of time on that, but I realize, and I've heard from other people, you're going to scare people away from seed saving. So if you can ignore it. For me, I don't want people who I share seeds with to get some new hybrid if they're expecting an heirloom or a pollinated variety. But in your own garden, it doesn't matter that much. The worst that could happen, maybe with a cucurbit, like a squash, you might get a bitter, squash with cucurbit casein in it. Or, maybe you have a bush bean that crossed with a pole bean and you get something in between next year. But it's not the end of the world. So I think the first thing you should do is just start the process of knowing the plant through its whole life cycle, learning when it's ready for seed harvest, and just doing it and planting it and seeing what happens. If you're really worried about the purity, you have that chart and you can keep them isolated to prevent unwanted cross-pollination. But one of the funnest things for me about being a seed saver is just like really knowing the plants that we eat, right? If you only know lettuce on your plate, you really miss out on a lot. Like, look how wild this looks. This could be from one plant. I mean, one plant could make this many flower heads. So lettuce and all plants are really incredible beings, and as a seed saver, you get to fully understand, well, as much as we can as humans, their life cycle. And so, going back to that, knowing when it's ready. So there are some resources. We brought some books. We'll tell you what's in front of you, but in terms of the other crops that aren't here, Seed to Seed by Suzanne Ashworth is a great go-to. Like, that was my first seed saving book.
Mine too.
It's very comprehensive. It has so many crops. Not all crops. There's some things I wish were in there, but it has more crops than most seed saving resources. For farmers who are getting into producing seed, The Organic Seed Grower by John Navazio is an excellent resource, and that's over there with the books too. So there's resources for getting to know when it's time to harvest. But for example, so lettuce, this is not exactly how it looks when you take it off the plant. You want the flowers, which are little yellow dandelion-looking flowers, right? Even those look like dandelions. Will feather, like, you know, all these feathers, the fluffy seed delivery system. Because they go on the wind and they bring the seed to another location. And when about half of the plant has feathered, because it all happens at different times, that's when I cut off the stalk, and we'll put it in my hoop house in a sunny place to dry down for another week or so before I take this whole thing and whack it in a bucket. Whack in a bucket is a technical term for the way I clean most of my seeds. Yeah.
I've seen some sources say you should never dry seeds in the sun, or you should store seeds in the sun.
It's true. Yeah, I dry most of my seed pods in the sun. You know, with some exceptions, there's no seeds exposed right now. They're in their pods. And that's also how I do, you know, okra and beans and peas and corn that are still in there.
Okay, so as long as they're still enclosed in the plant matter, it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's how.
And I use my hoop house to get things nice, dry, and crispy, you know, before processing too.
Yeah, I won't ever have the seeds bare, like,
Right.
in the sun, in a hoop house, definitely not. But encapsulated in their plant material, it's a great way to well, first of all, it'll continue developing, because only half of the flowers have turned to feathers, so you'll notice that after a week in the hoop house, more will have feathered out. And then also just the plant material gets brittle, and that makes cleaning the seed so much easier. So I've heard people who don't have hoop houses, who has hoop house or a greenhouse? Oh, there's really a lot of you, more than I expected.
That's more than I thought.
But for those of you that don't, people are like, oh, I put it in my car and just drive around with it for a week. And that'll zap it. Or like a window that's exposed to the sun.
I dry my chili peppers on the dashboard of my car.
I put them in my garage, in my attic. My whole house smelled like garlic this year.
Oh, that's great. Is there some kind of airflow, or is it just kind of...
Yeah, I've got full soffit vents and gable vents in the
Great.
attic.
Airflow will help prevent mold and rot.
I put them in wire shelves.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. In my hoop house, I'll put them on wire shelves or on like sheets that have some airflow underneath them. Okay, where was I going with that? Oh, whack in a bucket. So for really any of these dry seeded things, I have these really big tubs here. And we can do this after, perhaps. Originally, you know, my mentor, Dr. Weaver, that's not how, he doesn't do the whack in the bucket method. And for 40 years, it's because he's just been keeping his own seed collection. And he hasn't been selling seed. The germination rate doesn't matter that much as long as he gets something. And what happens if you go through and take every seed off of this lettuce is you're getting the mature and the immature seed at the same time. And so when you whack it in the bucket, then the ripest seed falls. That's the theory. And my germination rates on lettuce have been great. Whereas when I used to go after every little seed, I'd get 20%, 30%. Now I'm getting in the 80s and 90s from the whack in the bucket method.
For just your everyday backyard garden, which I treat lettuce as, I just let it go to seed and that's it.
Oh, and fall and come up
And then I
against.
transplanted because it's so early that it's not really affecting anything in well, that space was reserved for fill in the blank.
Right.
So, but I just transplanted it where I want to, and I've saved myself a bunch of steps, and I have a lot of lettuces very early.
Self-seeding stuff is great.
So that's a good way to do it, actually.
Yeah, that's great for a lot of greens in particular. Yeah. So that's lettuce. Feel free to jump in at any point, Lisa. It's similar with a lot of other asters, like the chicory, and umbels or carrot family plants like carrots or cilantro, or a lot of herbs in that family. You want to let them usually dry in the plant. Lettuce is the exception. Why do you think we take the lettuce seeds before they're fully dry on the plant? You lose them how? Drop. And what else might happen? Birds, they get excited about seeds. Yep, there's other things too. What else? Wind.
I've been trying to grow chickpeas for the last bunch of years, and it's just, I can only do seed stuff on Mondays and Thursdays, because Tuesday and Friday are picking days, Wednesday and Saturday are market days, so I've got Monday very specific and regimented, and I swear to God, it's just like the corn with raccoons. They know the night it's ready. Like they don't do it a day early. They're there before you. And but my chickpeas, I haven't gotten any chickpeas yet because I watch them. Okay, Monday I'm going to harvest those, and rodents come in, and I just find little pebbles. It's so sad. It's such a hard time.
For me, it's worms. I don't know if you all tried growing chickpeas, but I always get a little worm that goes in and eats the seed. And I find, it's finally ready and it's empty.
And chickpeas are the cutest plants ever. Like,
Yeah, and then they're so soft and like wet.
they're like lovely.
You touch the chickpea deep. Like a little mist, permanent mist. Okay, chickpea love fest. Where are we going? Oh, and also wet. Like, a lot of lettuce seed is grown in the West Coast, and they're so lucky because the summer is dry, and they can let it go longer on the plant. They even will cut it down and let it dry on a tarp in the field, uncovered, because they know it's not going to rain. So that's the other thing about lettuce and some of the other dry-seeded crops is you have to watch the weather report and be very careful.
This year in the Northeast, we had such a rainy season. I don't think I had more than 3 days in a row without rain, April to August or something. But drying my beans, because my beans, the dry beans, so stressful. And I wound up being desperate. I made a big mistake. I actually, I had it on netting, and it got so stressful at the end, more rain, and stuff was going to mold. So I wound up cutting down huge sections of trellis netting and rolling up with the bean plants still on them, carrying them into the tunnel I have a big greenhouse to dry. And then I cut strips and put them all in buckets, and then I have to, I might have 3 or 4 varieties that I'd have to, separate out. It was so much extra work and trouble, but that rain just wouldn't quit this year. And moisture is your big enemy seed saving. Moisture and heat, and especially the combination or fluctuation and stuff. I kind of talked about that in one of my slides. The moisture, before you store stuff, you want to really check that moisture level because stuff molds so easily.
Right. So once I take the seeds out, instead of drying them in the hoop house, I'll take them into my seed room, which is in a basement that has fairly consistent temperatures in the 40s and 50s tops. And but that's not even that necessary, that temperature range. And what's necessary is that there's airflow, that the seeds are laid out in a thin layer, and I usually put them on either paper towel or paper bags to wick a little bit of the moisture out, and let them sit for a week, 2 weeks, even 3 weeks before I'll put them in a jar. That also allows critters to escape who are hiding in the seeds, instead of locking in some spiders and whatever might be in with the seeds, which have moisture in them too, and they might, some of those things will eat the seeds. You're letting them escape, and then storing it in a tight glass jar with I use a screw top lid because of critters that can get in lids that are not screw top.
I was wondering, Does it help to put some of those silica packets in with the seeds? When you
I
seal them
don't
up in a
do
bag or jar?
I know a lot of people do that. I've definitely heard of that. I don't do it.
Yeah, I don't necessarily.
I was just wondering, because we're just replacing all the smoke detectors in our house, and I noticed that each smoke detector came with a little silica packet, and I have some other things too. So I wonder if I should hang on to these.
And I did want to say with like saving things like cucumbers and a lot of people try and like you. I think you were alluding to cucumber seed. The edible stage is not ready yet, and so things like cucumbers, eggplants, you really want to let them get yellow, kind of that yellowish orangish, before you try to save seed from those. So it's important. I guess the upshot is you need to know the proper stage of seed harvest. I did amaranth quinoa. And I harvested it and it looked ready and everything, and there was no viable seed. I did it like probably a week too early, but again, it was a rainy fall, and it's like it was a rare one. And I didn't get any good seed off it because I did it too early. I wasn't really familiar. It looked ready. I tapped it and like little seed particles would come out, but they weren't viable.
So if you leave it on the vine or growing longer, like into say the winter, do you lose the seed? Does it kill the seed? Or
you would want to get it before winter because you don't want to and you also want to be thoughtful about identifying which ones you want to save. Like mark what was your most ideal one to save seeds from, and then I would just save it when it's if you're talking about like a cucurbic before it kind of gets all icky and disintegrating.
okay.
It's yellow, overripe, over mature, too mature to eat, but before it starts to disintegrate. Go to bush. Rotten cucumbers.
I had a similar experience with amaranth. I was trying to harvest it before it spread everywhere in my farm, but I harvested it too early, but I was worried that it was going to get ripe and then go everywhere. Right. So how do you time that? Do you put a paper bag over it to try and
some things you can put a bag. Some things that are prone to shattering you could bag. Sure. Yeah. And just keep an eye on it, check it every day,
So how would I know when it was ripe, I guess is the question.
I'm still learning. I grew a couple amaranth crops this year and was able to get good germination. What I would do is go out and hit the plant into my hand and just see what fell out and maybe eat it, just get a sense.
I did that, and I had some, coming off, so I harvested it and put it in, and then nothing more would come off.
Did it already shatter out before you got to that point? Do you think possibly it shattered out before you realized?
No, there was a lot of seed still on the head.
Well, I started noticing seed weeks before I took it. It just didn't seem fully ripe.
Right.
And so I let it stay longer, and of course now I have amaranth coming up everywhere. And I know that's what you're trying to avoid.
Right.
That's just how amaranth is. I don't know how you can avoid that. And for me, I eat amaranth. It's a Caribbean delicacy, callaloo. And so with all the volunteer amaranth that come up, you can just cut and cook like spinach. But it means you're going to be doing a lot of management of volunteers. So I don't know how to control. That's why it's in a lot of community gardens, it's illegal to grow amaranth. Illegal. It's against the garden rules because people don't want it coming up in their beds. I'm not sure a better answer. Sorry.
Back to the sun golds. If you leave those tomatoes in the winter, the seed will overwinter outside. I have loads of chipmunks, and they seem to really like sun golds, so they have planted them. This year I had sun gold plants everywhere on that property growing, even on the north side. They would eat the tomatoes, and then they would just move them and plant them. So they overwintered, and they came up just fine this last summer.
Were they as good as the previous year? Did they taste as good?
The ones that weren't on the north side of the house, yes. If they were on the south side, they were fine. The shapes, it started changing. Some of them started not so oval, and more of an oblong shape, but they tasted just fine.
You might have the key to the open pollinated sun gold in your yard.
I saved the seeds from all the different ones that barked.
Everyone's trying to.
Yeah, this one has a
make it
different
happen.
shape, but they all tasted the same. But
I think sun gold dehybridization is probably the single most worked on puzzle out there. I've actually lost a couple, is it copra onions? Disappeared, and they were a hybrid, and they were such a great onion. And I knew several people that were trying to dehybridize I think it was the copras. Drop from the trade. And that's the one thing I hate about tomato varieties, the hybrids and stuff. They drop them from the trade all the time for no apparent reason. It's just this random thing. It's like you settle on one thing, and then next year it's not available anymore. It's very annoying.
Well,
that's a way to stimulate the market. Keep buying fresh seed.
Well, it's an important point. Another reason to save your own seeds, not just the hybrids, but we lose so many of our favorite heirloom or open pollinated varieties from the catalogs when they think people don't want them anymore, or their one provider of that seed stops providing it. So that's another really important reason. If we have favorite varieties, to just make sure you're part of the solution and you're saving those seeds, so you don't find next year that it's not in any of the catalogs anymore. I know that's true for Tobacco Road Farm. They started saving some, I don't remember which varieties, but they told me that's why they started saving some of the seeds, even though it doesn't seem like a profitable thing to let a crop sit in the field an extra few months till it's ripe for seed. Sometimes it is if that's the core piece of one of your markets, or it's just so important to you.
This is also true for wild plants. I tend to save more seeds on wild plants. I will collect the wild. But it's just as important. We're an awful lot of habitat loss, and I do a lot of medicine making and stuff with wild plants. So and also I'm terribly lazy, so I'd rather have them growing in my yard than having to go hunt them down. But it's just as important to grab some of these wild plants, and it's much easier in the sense that you really don't have to do much to them. You catch them at the right time, and you scatter them in a similar type of environment. So.
Great. And did you learn from somebody when to harvest those seeds?
Not really. I just I've done wild lettuce because I wanted the painkiller in the lettuce, or I've done jewelry. And whenever those seeds are ready to go, that's when you should be planting them, because that's when they're self-planting in the wild. So it's a matter of observation, more or less. I'm sure somewhere somebody has documented it. And there all are wild seed harvesters.
Right.
And then there's United Plant Savers. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but they're really big on a lot of the wild, particularly medicinal plants, so you can look those up if that's your interest.
Well, the reason I asked was not to figure out who taught you, because I imagine you taught yourself, right? And I think that's really important, too, is that we can be here and teach you everything about everything we know. But once you develop a relationship to the plant world, to the level where you're starting to notice wild plants that are ready, the seeds are ripe, I think that's a really powerful thing that probably most of our ancestors until very recently knew how to do. Thanks for coming, Beth. Happy birthday. So I don't know, that's not really something I need that's like on our PowerPoint or anything, but it's one of the most satisfying things to me is to be able to walk through the world, whether it's a cultivated world or a wild world, and be like, oh, that plant seed is ready. Let me grab a few and put it in my pocket and plant it somewhere else.
We were out a little walk around here while we waited for it, and we picked up those become pods. Yeah, they're there, you just gotta look.
Yeah, nature is a powerful teacher. Yeah, thanks for bringing that.
I'm going to say, if anybody has kids, I think it's all an older crowd here, is that teach them what things look like too. What does something look like as a seedling? When is it ready to harvest? When is it ready to save the seeds? Because people don't know this stuff. I mean, as a farmer, I go, to open farm days. I haven't had people out to my farm just because of logistics, and it's just amazing. Or I remember when my daughter was in preschool, and they would go to a farm, and even the teachers don't know. I mean, they're pointing out to the kids, oh, see, that's a sheep. That's where cotton comes from. And it's the same thing with plants. They don't recognize the plants, especially when they're either really young before harvest or when they're, getting ready to collect the seeds, they don't, know what they look like standing in the fields. Because it doesn't look the same as in the supermarket.
We're getting, actually, time's flying right by. How many of you have saved tomato seeds? Like a lot of you. So we call it the gateway to seed saving, because that's typically somebody's entry into the vegetable world of seed saving. Easy to do, and you all know fermentation. So the wet seed processing, do several crops. They call it wet seed processing. As you're fermenting the tomato seeds, it serves an important function of, number one, breaking down the gel capsule around the seed, which has a germination inhibitor in it. So the tomato seed isn't germinating in the tomato as it's growing, because that's a warm, moist environment. And secondly, it also functionally sterilizes the seed. It breaks down any sort of pathogens, especially bacterial and fungal pathogens on the seed. So, and all we do is just, for those who haven't done it yet, super easy. One thing some people, I made this mistake the first time I ever did it, was, you just scoop out the pulp with seeds into, like, I use a red Solo cup. If it's a drier tomato, you can add a little splash of water. Otherwise, most juicy tomatoes have enough moisture. And let it ferment for 2 or 3 days, depending on the temperature, and it'll get that thick, smelly mat of mold. That's a good thing. I dumped out the first batch I ever did because I thought I did something wrong. It's actually a good thing. And then I just simply run in, take up the hose or the faucet, whatever, and run off. As I am having to let the water run in, let it decant and float off. Any of the floating seeds are the non-viable ones. The good seeds sink. I've had people reverse that thought process. So your good seeds are heavier and plumper. They sink to the bottom and just decant, and all the pulp and the debris and stuff floats off. So tomatoes, super easy, super fun, lots of possibilities. Tomatoes are generally self-pollinating, but if you're doing seed trading or anything where you need purity ensured, I just go to the like AC Moore, Joanne Fabrics, whatever. In the wedding section, they have those little organza bags, and you can tie them over the blossom clusters until the fruit sets, and then once you see little fruit-sized marbles set, then I take them off. And they have the nice feature to me. They have the little string ties, and I just tie it around the base of that fruit cluster, so I know that fruit cluster was protected during pollination. And it's they're brightly colored, so you can see them easily. Find them in the field again.
Just add that I don't do that. I don't bag hardly anything unless I'm protecting them from birds, like sunflowers. But I just isolate personally. I mean, probably for people who grow a variety of things in their garden, Lisa's method would be best if you're going for purity. But for me, I'll grow 2 tomatoes in my field at least 50 feet apart because they're heirlooms and they have more open flower structures than a lot of the newer varieties. So I really try to play it safe. And that way I don't have to worry too much about cross-pollination or bagging because I'm controlling for that with the amount of space between the plants. So that's just another method.
Yeah, in my space in my garden is so regimented that I grow, I might grow them all in 2 feet apart. So I'll bag if I want purity, if I worry about it. So that was just a description of what I basically just went over on wet seed processing. Peppers, peppers are great because you're saving them as the fruit changes color to its mature color. So you can eat the pepper and just take out the seeds. And peppers aren't really messy or anything, and I just let them dry.
Hot peppers are not messy, but you could really hurt yourself.
Oh, yeah.
So I use, gloves. Yeah, maybe a mask if it's like a scorpion pepper or something.
I don't feel hot, super hot. So I'm like, I don't understand those people. They're like, I don't have the. And also, one thing, spread out to dry. And the tomato seeds, when they're wet seeds, they tend to stick. A lot of people put on paper towels, and you gotta pick them off the paper towel. Coffee filters, they're kind of have that smoother texture, and you can write right on the coffee filter and label them. And that's the other thing is always. You think that you're gonna remember, you never remember. Always write it down, label it right on there. I mean, I have beans. I'm like, ugh. I knew it when I was out in the field filling my pockets, and by the time I mix it up with everything else, I don't remember.
For the wet seeds, I always use because I'm doing such big quantities usually, I use paper bags because, yes, the paper towels are so annoying to pick seeds off. But paper bags, you can just kind of swipe them off once they're dry.
You can also use the styrofoam trays you get from the grocery stores. Those work very well. And I just wash them and continue to use them time and time again.
Dry processing, we kind of talked about with the lettuce, a lot of stuff. One of my specialties now is sunflowers, which I actually have some sunflower seeds if any of you want to try the sunflower. It's my profile picture on Facebook. I don't know if I have a picture of it. Maybe. Yeah, we kind of went over dry. Beans, a lot of people ask me a question on my beans about growing varieties and isolation and stuff. I don't isolate, I do mass plantings on beans. To me, beans are an easy beginner crop because they're 95% self-pollinating. Mostly legumes, the beans in particular, the majority, there are promiscuous exceptions, we call them. Promiscuous exceptions, but in general, beans pollinate before the blossom even opens. So they're pretty safe. The exceptions a lot of times will be bumblebees have stronger jaws and they'll chew through the sides of the blossom before and cross. And to me, beans are one of those crops that are fine if I get up to 5% crosses. I don't care because some of the crosses are super interesting to work with, and that's how you can stabilize and get new varieties anyway. So I don't mind. And also, unlike cucurbits, any bean cross is just as edible as the parents. It doesn't matter. Corn, let corn fully dry in the field till the husks are brown. And then I husk it and I store it and I put out, and I use bread trays, spread them out till they're well dried, and then I put them in clean metal garbage cans with a lid on so rodents don't get into it. Because I'm doing a fairly large quantity of corn. And we talked about isolation on corn.
Can I just ask a question on corn? I noticed on the chart here that you've got corn is good for 6 years. Now, I just sent a bunch of corn that I bought last year off to Puerto Rico because I thought it had to be used within 2 years. That's what I printed out a chart from High Mowing Seeds to send along with it, and it said 2 years.
I didn't look at chart with corn.
Same thing with melons. Melons were
melons are pretty good, but corn typically I would go shorter length of time on corn. Like I would normally tell you 2 to 3 years.
It reduces 6 years here.
It reduces germination sometimes, but it could still be viable. I mean, I've heard of people who have found jars of corn out in the shed and germinated a percentage. It might be a very low percentage still many years later. It just is something that viability is, certain crops, the viability reduces faster than others. Some are more, shelf stable, we'll call them.
I've had corn last that long. This was put together by Seed Matters, so I'm not sure where they got their numbers, but it's a rule of thumb. So all these things are going to be a little different.
It's the first chart that I've seen for corn and melons, so much longer than anything else that I've ever seen.
Well, one interesting thing about corn, because you'll notice on the chart the isolation distance is like off the charts. Because of the wind pollination, you got to keep them. If you're not bagging them, you got to keep them like 3 miles apart, 1 to 3 miles apart. And so with a collection like at Roughwood, where it was before, where we have 20 or 30 types of corn, there's many ways you can do besides bagging to make sure that you're keeping them all through the years. And one is planting every 3 or 4 weeks. So we could do 2 to 3 successions in a year, and they'll be tasseling at a different time. Another one is that's the only variety at Roughwood with 4,000 varieties of heirlooms that we would keep in the freezer. We didn't freeze anything else, but corn, because of the time and space limitations, we would keep in the freezer, and that keeps it very viable. So that's another option.
Okay, well, whatever I plant this spring, I'll stick in the freezer and see if I can get a third year out of it. I got a lot of glass gem corn last year.
Nice.
One of the things, as Owen just was also related to, is the squash species. You have basically 4 main cucurbit species, and Pepo, Maximum, Moschata, and Mixta. And one way you can get multiple squashes that you can save is to just grow 1 out of each of those categories. And that, again, actually, do you want to do your squash? We brought a squash, basically just open the mature fruit, Scoop out the seeds, clean them by washing them off, dry.
I brought these two because, believe it or not, they're the same species, right? And maybe in the back it's going to be hard for me to do this, but so this is one. And it's not the biggest one that I grew. That's speak of.
What's that called?
This one's Lunga di Napoli. It's a town from Naples, long squash of Naples, Italy. And this is a recent open pollinated creation from, I think, Cornell, the honey nut. It's like a butternut that's even sweeter and it's so delicious, and they happen to be small. So they're the same. They're both Cucurbita moschata. So I would never personally grow them in the same field or within half a mile of each other because I really like both of them a lot, and I don't. It'd be interesting to see what happens between these two. But I just have no idea, and I like them as they are. So, yeah, just really quick, and this could be like our wet seed thing, and I happen to know where the seeds are in this squash. I mean, usually they're in the butt here, so I don't need to like cut it the long way like I would a cucumber. I'll just cut it. I don't know if I can get this knife.
There's a saw.
It's a very soft squash.
It's pretty soft.
Yeah. So Cucurbita moschata is the butternut species, and it's really, maybe you know this, but it's the best species that I've grown in terms of resisting a lot of pests. The squash borer can't really bore into the stem, and it got all my other ones. So
I did have a tromboncino get squash borer.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're resistant, but they're not.
Yeah, they're not
invulnerable.
foolproof. They're not totally borer-proof, but they're much more resistant than other species. This one's Lunga di Napoli, but in general, the Cucurbita moschata species, which is butternuts, the honey nuts, this, what else is in there? Oh, the kusha, no, that's mixed. The Jamaican pumpkins, what they call a pumpkin in Jamaica is usually this species.
And can you say the name of the species one more time?
Moschata.
Oh, it's up there.
Oh,
Yeah, I
I know where it
actually
went.
switched it. It's Moschata. Moschata.
Thank you very
much. When did you harvest this?
I harvested this must have been around September. And so,
You want to get them before a freeze comes.
I get them when the stem dries out, when it's basically no longer pulling anything from its plant. And what's amazing about winter squashes is just that it's like the climate change ready, or it really is awesome because you don't have to refrigerate it, you don't have to can it, you don't have to dry it, and it just sits there in my house until I'm ready to eat it. And so, if people want to take home some of this is reserved for my mom, but I can cut chunks off of it. And basically what I'll do is I'll pull out, just like if you were cooking a squash, you pull out the seeds, you clean them in whatever in a strainer. If you were going to roast your squash or pumpkin seeds, you treat it the same way except you don't roast it. So you're just going to lay them out in a thin layer, like I said, on a paper bag, and let it dry for a few weeks, because you want to let seeds dry until they feel dry and then let them dry some more, so that in storage there's no chance of them rotting. So unlike the tomato, I'm not going to ferment this, but otherwise it's a similar process. Some people do ferment squash seeds.
And then I'm going to address garlic real quick. How many of you saved garlic strains? Good number of you. So garlic, that's what got me into saving. And for the garlic, I picked the most perfect, the biggest heads, most perfect shape, representative of what I'm looking for. Carpathian, typically 8 to 10 cloves per, and I choose a nice uniform shape. I select against teardrop shapes. I select, and then out of this, say it has, looks like 8 or 9 cloves in it. I select the biggest cloves out of the most perfect heads. I discard the smaller cloves, and then I select against twins. And you want to look at the basal plate, which just means the bottom of that clove as you break it apart. And if you see you can see at the basal plate an indentation where you can see it's going to twin. This variety is prone to twinning, and for market, I don't want twins because they would grow fine for the home gardener, but for me, I need a nice, perfect-looking head for market. So I select against the twins, and I put the rejects in a 5-gallon pail, and I sell the cloves 5-gallon pails to the restaurant. So nothing goes to waste, or else I would dehydrate and grind it to a garlic powder. So garlic is really easy, highly recommend it. And there is some extra garlic I have in the back. There's a crate that's table garlic, or even this, I don't care. This is a hardneck garlic. This is a roken bowl. Yep. And anyway, you can feel free, that's extra garlic that's left over for table use. It's been in cold storage, so you don't want to keep it at room temperature because it'll start to sprout. Now it's had enough chill degrees, it'll still, think the spring's here. So it might be used up, so feel free to help yourself to the box of garlic in the back for eating. It's too late to plant garlic, it's a fall planting thing.
I know you usually plant in the fall, and I planted 3 beds of it, but just wondering because I want to see what happens. You
can spring plant it, sure.
I mean, it might not be the best heads.
It might not be. If you plant it, especially as early spring as you can, you can spring plant. It's just ideally a fall planted thing like any bulb. And ideally what I do is I plant in mid-October and I want basically root development, no shoot development. I mulch it when the ground freezes and then, so it's basically just got its roots going now and it'll start to sprout in April, beginning of April. But yeah, you can plant it as soon as you can, especially if you've raised beds, you can get them in March to stick in. So yeah, feel free to take some. This is my Carpathian, And this is just a picture of bean collections. A cool, there's like 2 more slides, I think. Cool corn. And we've already addressed this, that, collecting seeds from a representative. And we're going to break up here.
Well, on that point, you'll notice on that same handout in that chart, there's a population size column, and that's just a recommended minimum population size for best genetic diversity. So always the more plants of anything that you grow, not always, because some plants don't do a lot of outcrossing, so it probably doesn't matter much to them how many of them you grow. But for some plants, you'll see on there, especially the insect and wind pollinated plants, will need large numbers in order to ensure, that they don't become inbred, that they have a large population size and they're more resilient depending on what comes in future years with climate change or pest pressures or whatever. It's better to have a bigger genetic pool to be able to be resilient. So we're thinking of maybe breaking, and if folks want to, we have about 10 more minutes for the official end, but we can even stay later. If people want to come over to this corner and we can, whack in the bucket and use the seed machine. And I know that Lisa has beans for you to look at. We have a library here of books related to seed keeping.
And check out all the stuff we brought to show you and do some hands-on stuff. The beans, I will be back there, and because I have certain ones I can share, certain ones I can't. It has to be a communication. And I was doing a thing with record keeping also. It's also nice to keep written down who gave you the seed. I always thought, I'll just remember. Just keep that kind of history with it. I'm trying to get better at my record.
What is the name of the plant in the first bucket? Next to the
in the box?
The box, sorry.
I think it's a Russian, red Russian kale.
Does anybody have questions before we break?
I have one question about planting seeds. My family comes from high desert, very alkaline soil, and I have my great grandparents and my grandmothers. Seeds, and I'm thinking I live in Connecticut where it's really rich and lovely soil. Is that did you change the whole dynamic of the plant?
It depends on the plant. I mean, I actually grow rare poppy corn, which is a good example, and it's adapted to the dry southwestern conditions. I grow it up here in upstate New York, and in general, I've had really great results with it. This past year, where it was very rainy and everything, super problem with rust and fusarium. So some things are just not adapted to, and that is one thing I've kind of learned over the last bunch of years is that not everything can grow everywhere, and sometimes it's better. They do have a home, that they're most appropriate for. Doesn't mean you should try, but some things aren't happening in certain places.
Just wondering if there are any varieties that, when they cross-pollinate, show the hybrid traits that year? Because I've always heard not to plant corn. next to two different varieties of corn next to each other because you're going to get a funny ear of corn that year.
Corn can show, there's a lot of different genes, but like, so say for me, I grow 2 hybrid super sweet corns that have the shrunken SH2 gene, which has the shrunken kernel, and yeah, once in a while I'll see a cross within my field corn. You'll see it'll be a colored corn, which is an internal express trait, and you'll see the shrunken gene expressed. So corn is actually one thing that can show because that's the seed for the following. But most things you won't see until you plant that seed till the following.
What about like squashes? Would those show?
Squash you see next time around.
Because we get funny ones showing up that look like a
that was crossed from before. It was crossed from before. And that's actually 2 of the most common myths. Peppers and hot peppers. They're like, oh, you can't plant sweet peppers next to hot peppers. I do it all the time. And it's not going to be, there's crosses that can happen, but it'll be the following. People swear by it. And also people say, oh, you can't plant cucumbers next to melons. That they'll make each other bitter. Totally not true.
Until the next.
If cucumbers, melon.
What's the best way to store seeds for longevity?
It depends on what it is. Dry, dark, cool are the 3 main factors. Certain things trip into the freezer can extend longevity if you keep it in there. I tend to not do that so much because I would take my stuff in and out too much. It's like put it in the freezer, leave it in there until you need it. But I go to so many seed talks and stuff that it would be bad for it to constantly be back and forth. The alternations would be terrible.
With that cool, dark, dry, insect-proof containers.
Insect-proof, rodent-proof.
Rodent-proof, yeah. Don't want a lot of fluctuating temperatures. It kind of inspires their life forces to move. So yeah, we're going to break into these separate groups. I just want to say thank you so much again.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.